Lyddie. Chapter 17. Doffer. It had been 2 weeks since she fell ill, and Dr. Morris still refused to let her return to work. Her mind roared protest, but her legs could hardly carry her to the privy. Her body had never betrayed her before. She despised its weakness, and every day she heard the first bell and ordered herself up and dressed. But she would only be up a few minutes, not even through washing herself at the basin, before the sweat broke out on her forehead from the effort, and she was obliged to let Rachel help her back to bed. There was too much time in bed. She slept, and still there were hours awake to worry about her mind, skimple-scompled back on itself like threads in a snarled loom. Why hadn't Charlie written? She should have heard from him long ago. Perhaps her letter had been lost. That was it. She sat straight up. "Better rest, Lyddie." Rachel was there as always. "The doctor said." "Get me some paper and my pen and ink from the box there, the little one on top of the bandbox. I must write Charlie again." Rachel obeyed, but even as she handed Lyddie the writing materials, she protested. "You ain't supposed to worry, Lyddie. Doctor said." Lyddie put her hand on Rachel's head, and her hair was soft as goose down. It's all right, Rachie. I'm much better, eh? Nearly all well now." Rachel's brow furrowed, but her eyes were clear, not the dead, blank eyes of her rival. Lyddie stroked her hair. "I had me such a good nurse, I couldn't have believed it." Rachel smiled and nodded at the writing box. "Tell Charlie," she said. "I'll be sure to," Lyddie said. "He'll be monstrous proud." By the next week she was feeling truly ready to go back to work and remembering with every breath her last act at the factory. Merciful heavens, there was probably no work to go back to. Had she really? Had she truly stomped on Mr. Marston's foot with her boot heel? She hardly knew whether to laugh or cry. She sent a note to Bridget. Most of the girls were wary of speaking to Diane under Mr. Marston's nose, asking her and Diana to stop over after supper. That evening, both Diane and Bridget came as she had hoped. Bridget brought more soup from her now fully recovered mother, and a half bottle of Dr. Rush's infallible health pills. "Me mother swears by them," she said, blushing. Diana handed Lyddie a paper-bound book, American Notes for General Circulations, by Mr. Charles Dickens. "Since you're such an admirer of the gentleman, I thought you might like to see what he wrote about factory life in Lowell," she said. "I suppose he was comparing us to the satanic mills of England. Anyhow, it's a bit romantical, as they say." "A book? By Mr. Dickens? How did you know?" "My dear, anyone who copies a book out page by page and pastes it to the frame." Lyddie sent Rachel and Bridget down to beg a cup of tea from Mrs. Bedloe. "Diana, I got to ask you, has Mr. Marston said anything of me?" "Well, of course, he missed you at once. You're his best girl." Lyddie felt her face go crimson. I told him I'd ask after you. That's when I learned how ill you were. A lot of the girls have been out with this fever, especially the Irish. There's been many deaths in the acre." Lyddie looked away out the tiny, dirty window of the bedroom. "Thank you, God. How could I leave my baby girl?" Diana reached over from where she was sitting on the edge of the other bed and put her hand lightly on Lyddie's arm. "I'm grateful you were spared, Lyddie," she said softly. Lyddie pressed her lips together and gave a little nod. "I reckon I'm too ornery to die." "I wouldn't be surprised," said Diane. "Can you recollect? Can you remember just what Mr. Marston said when he asked about me?" "He didn't speak directly to me. He doesn't like to think that you and I are friends, you know. But I know he's worried. He wouldn't want to lose you." "So I still got a place?" Diane looked at her as though she was crazy. "Why on earth not?" "I stomped his foot," said Lyddie. "You what?" I was all a fever, only I didn't know, eh? And he tried to hold me after the rest had gone. He wouldn't let me go, so I stomped down on his foot." Diane threw her head back and laughed out loud. "It ain't a joke. He'll have my place for it." No, she said, trying to recover. "No," she said, taking out her handkerchief and wiping her eyes. "No, I don't think so. He's probably more frightened than you are. Have you ever seen Mrs. Overseer Marston, Lyddie? If word ever got to that august lady, She stopped laughing and lowered her voice. Her ears were cocked toward the open door. Nonetheless, I wouldn't make attacking the overseer a regular practice, my dear. Do be more discreet in the future, that is, if you want to stay on at the corporation. The day may come when Mr. Marston would welcome any excuse to let you go. She smiled wryly. It sounds as though I'm advising you not to sign any petitions or consort with any known radicals. But maybe he meant nothing. I was burnt up with the fever. Maybe I mistook kindness for... She grimaced. You know, I'm not that kind of girl men look at that way. I'm plain as a plowed sod. Diane raised an eyebrow, but Rachel and Bridget were at the door with the tea, so she said nothing more. I'll pretend, thought Lyddie, as she tried to unsnarl her brain over the steaming cup. I'll pretend I was crazy from the fever and didn't know what I was doing. Can't even remember what I did. I want to be a doffer, Lyddie, Rachel said. Lyddie had brushed her sister's curls as was weaving them into plaits. Rachel wanted to pin her hair up like the big girls in the house, but Lyddie insisted that the braids hang down. She couldn't bear for Rachel to look like a funny little make-believe woman. Bridget says her little sister is a doffer, and she's no bigger than me. Oh, Rachel, you need to go to school. She loved to braid Rachel's hair, but was suddenly ashamed that she had only string to bind it with. She should have splurged on a bit of ribbon. Rachel was so pretty for all her being too thin. She ought to have bright bows to set off the 2 silky curls at the end of each plait. They would brighten her drab little dress, but ribbons cost money, and string bound the hair just as well. She twisted each curl around her index finger and gave it a final brush. We got to get you into school. You don't want to grow ignorant as your Lyddie. You ain't ignorant at all. I seed you read. You want I should read to you, Rachie? No, I want you to let me be a doffer. We'll have to wait and see, eh? When we hear from Charlie. But they didn't hear from Charlie. They heard from Quaker Stevens. Dear Sister Worthen, thy brother asked me to look into the sale of thy farm. All inquiry has come to naught, but as I have business in the uncle's neighborhood on Wednesday next, I will inquire directly at the time. I trust thee and the little one are in good health. Son Luke asked to be remembered to thee. Thy friend and neighbor, Jeremiah Stevens. And that is the end of Chapter 17, Part 1.